Hello and welcome. In this video, I'll be going over how to install Ubuntu Virtual Machine on the Windows 10 host system using Oracle's VirtualBox software. Before we get started, I want to quickly go over the requirements or recommendations on the hardware required and also some basic terminology. Well, for Ubuntu, there's an absolute minimum requirement of 10 GB, but I recommend the plan and using at least 25 GB or more. All told, you should have a minimum of 25 to 30 GB of free space available for everything, but 50 plus GB of free space would be better, or as I have on the slide, 200 GB free. Also, placing the image on a solid state drive is preferable for performance reasons, but I've successfully installed virtual machines on normal magnetic hard disks and even external drives with good luck. Of course, the performance will be slower, as well as on the virtual machine's boot times, but it's an option if space is at a premium. Of course, as time goes on and SSD prices continue to plummet, there really is no reason you should be using anything but an SSD unless you are a student or someone on an extremely limited budget. A quick scan of Newegg reveals multiple SSD drives with 120 GB or more capacity going for as little as $25. Total system RAM is another thing we will need to consider when running a virtual machine on your host computer. Again, the more memory the better, with 4 to 8 GB probably being the bare minimum. You will need to use 2 to 4 GB for your guest system, and you will also want to keep at least that much reserved for your host system. Linux is usually a little bit better about having less memory than Windows is, but I would still recommend dedicating at least 2 GB to your guest VM, unless all you plan to do are some of the most basic of tasks. I normally like the 50-50 rule for memory allocation. So if I assign my guest virtual machine 2 GB of memory, I like to have at least 2 GB left in reserve for my host computer. This example would represent needing 4 GB of RAM installed on your host PC. You also need to consider your CPU. Today, multi-core CPUs are pretty much the standard, so this shouldn't be too much of a concern. However, I also like to enforce the 50-50 rule here as well. So if I have a 4-core system, for example, I can assign 2 of the cores to the guest system. This leaves 2 cores for my host system. Of course, under normal operation, your guest VM probably will not be running all out at 100% CPU utilization all the time anyway. But if something does go wrong and a process on your guest gets stuck running the CPU at full, it's nice to be able to close out of your VM on your host and not have the problem carry over and lock up your host system along with it. We'll be downloading the Ubuntu ISO image from the internet, which is about a 2 GB download. So high-speed internet connection is recommended. High-speed access is also becoming more common, so this normally won't be an issue for most people. But if you do live somewhere with a really slow connection, maybe under 1 megabit per second, you might want to try and obtain the ISO image through another means. Moving on, I also want to quickly go over some key terms I'll be using throughout this video. VM is short for virtual machine, which is a general term describing a computer environment that is virtualized. We'll be installing Ubuntu on a VM, which is also called the guest system. VB is short for Oracle's VirtualBox software we are using to create and run on our VM virtual machines. The host system is a physical PC you're probably using right now that you intend to install the VirtualBox software on to run the virtual guest machine. The guest machine then is a virtual machine that you'll be running within the VB software, in this case the virtual Ubuntu system. Let's begin by downloading the Ubuntu disk ISO that we will need to install on our virtual machine image. Go to the Ubuntu download site. You can just Google it, or I will leave a link in the description. And for this demonstration, I'll be using the desktop version. I'm also going to use the LTS or long-term support version. But the overall installation process should be the same if you want to use the latest version instead. Also, take note of the recommendations here, as we can use them as a guide for setting up the virtual machine later on. I'll be assigning the guest VM 2 CPU cores, 4 GB of memory, and probably around 120 GB of hard disk space. So we should be fine meeting these requirements. So go ahead and click on Download over here on the right, and then when the prompt appears, go ahead and click on Save File and click on OK. The file is about 1.9 GB in size, so it might take a while depending on your connection speed. While we wait on the download to finish, we can go over to the Oracle VirtualBox website. Here you can just go to virtualbox.org or again use Google if you need help finding it. Here you can click on the Download VirtualBox 6.1 banner. Here you can see the different platforms that are supported. Since we're using Windows 10 as our host system, go ahead and click on the Windows host link. Then you can go ahead and click on the Save File when the prompt appears. Once the download is finished, we can go ahead and install the VirtualBox software. So go to your Downloads folder, double-click on the VirtualBox 6.12 exe that we just downloaded. And after a few moments, the setup wizard will appear, shown here. Just minimize this quick. Okay, here we are at the Welcome to Oracle VM VirtualBox 6.1 setup wizard. So go ahead and click on Next to continue. Here we can pretty much just leave the defaults. You can adjust the features if you wish, but I'm just going to leave everything set. Go ahead and click on Next. Also here you can choose which shortcuts or icons you want to be installed. Pick and choose which options work best for you. I'm just going to accept all the defaults and click on Next. Here you'll get a warning about the installation causing your network to momentarily drop. This normally only takes a second or two, and on a hardwired connection you will not even notice. It may, however, cause your wireless connection to momentarily drop if you are installing the VM on, say, a laptop. If your Ubuntu download is still going, you may want to take a break here before moving on. But in any case, we'll eventually need to click on Yes to proceed. If you need to change any of the settings you made earlier, now is your chance. Otherwise, click on Install to begin the installation process. You may get a user account control prompt asking you if you want to allow the program to make changes. Click on Yes to continue. The install process only takes a few seconds. When it finishes, you will have the option to start the Oracle VirtualBox application. I will leave that box checked and click on Finish. You should now see the Oracle VM VirtualBox Manager window. It is here we can create and manage our virtual machines. So we can go ahead and click on New. Go ahead and give your VM a name. Here I'm just going to use Ubuntu. Notice the VirtualBox software automatically detects the name and pre-selects Ubuntu 64-bit for us. You can go on here and change it if you need to. But in our case, this is exactly what we want, so I'm just going to leave it. For my example though, I am going to be using a different folder to store the actual image, so I would change the machine folder location. Go ahead and click on the drop-down arrow, click on Other, then you can browse to the location where you want to store the files. I'm going to store the image on a separate SSD I installed on this machine. So in my E drive, I'm going to create a new folder called Ubuntu VM Image. Highlight the folder you created and click on Select Folder to select it. Now we're back at our original window. If you're putting everything on your C drive, you'll probably be okay with just the default location. But in either case, we can now click on Next. Now in this window, we can allocate how much of our system memory the guest OS can utilize. Using the recommendations we've seen earlier when downloading the Ubuntu image, I'm going to use 4 GB of memory, which just so happens to be 50% of the available RAM on this system. As mentioned before, I'd recommend not going over 50% of your system's RAM to ensure your host still has plenty to work with. You can either adjust the slider or just type in a number. Also notice that the color highlighting on the slider as you try to allocate a higher percentage of your RAM starts to go into the red or caution zone. Play it safe here and stay within the green, ideally at the 50% ratio as I am using. Once you're happy with your memory allocation, click on the Next button. Here, we're going to create a hard disk for our virtual machine. Go ahead and leave it at the default, create a virtual disk now, and click on Create. On this screen, you can leave VDI, VirtualBox Disk Image, selected, and click on Next. On this next screen, you can choose between dynamically allocated or fixed size. I normally use and recommend dynamically allocated, as in this mode, you only actually use up however much hard disk space your virtual machine needs. If you choose fixed size, that much disk space is reserved right away. In some cases, this may make sense, depending on your intentions for the virtual machine, and as the dialog suggests, may even offer a slight performance boost. but I'm going to leave it at dynamically allocated and click on Next. On this screen, we set the actual size we want to reserve for the virtual machine. Also notice the location of the image is located within the folder I created earlier on my E drive. I'm going to give it up to 120 GB of space. You can again use the slider or just go ahead and type in a number. Since I selected dynamically allocated earlier, this can be thought of as a max size it can grow to, and it will be much less in practice. Go ahead and click on Create. Now we've dropped back into VirtualBox VM Manager and can see we have the VM framework configured in the left menu area. Highlight this and click on Settings. You can review the settings we entered earlier under the General tab. Then go over and click on System. Under the Motherboard tab, I uncheck Floppy and I leave Optical and Hard Disk checked. You can also verify the memory settings we chose earlier and change it here if you need to. Click on Processor, and here we can assign how many cores we want to use. In my case, I'm going to assign 2 cores, as I have 4 cores on this machine. Again, I'm following my 50-50 rule. Everything else here should be good. We can move down to Display. In Display, I moved the slider up to 128 MB to allow for the most flexibility with screen resolutions. I'll leave everything else here set at default. Then we can move on to storage. Here notice we have our Ubuntu VDI disk image already predefined, but we need to add the Ubuntu ISO we downloaded earlier. Click on the disk icon that says Empty. Then over on the right, click on the new disk icon that appears and choose the disk file. Navigate to the Ubuntu ISO download, select it, and click on Open. Now you can see we have the download ISO associated as an optical drive. The rest of the menu items we can leave as is for now, so go ahead and click on OK to apply all the changes we made. Now we are ready for the actual install. With your VM highlighted, go ahead and click on Start at the top of the VM Manager window. If all goes well, you should get a message showing that our Ubuntu ISO image is set as our startup disk. You can go ahead and click on Start to confirm this choice. After a few moments, we'll be at the install screen. Go ahead and confirm your language, and since we actually want to install Ubuntu, go ahead and click on the Install Ubuntu button. Again, verify your keyboard layout and language. Just click on Continue. Here I'm going to choose Normal Installation. You can go ahead and check Install Third-Party Software if you want. And go ahead and click on Continue. In the installation type, we want Erase Disk and Install Ubuntu. Even though it sounds ominous, don't worry, this won't delete anything on your Windows system, as we're using the 120 GB of virtual disk space we reserved earlier. Go ahead and click on Install Now, and then click on Continue. You can choose your region here if it doesn't auto-detect your location. Go ahead and click on Continue. Here we need to type a name and password. I'm just going to use dev. I'll just give it a simple password. You can set it to log in automatically if you want. I will, since this is just a demonstration. If you share your host machine with others or just want to be more secure in general, you may wish to leave it on default or require a password to log in. Make your selection and click on Continue. Now the actual installation will begin. This can take a few minutes, so it might be a good time to take a break if you need to. Once the installation is complete, you will need to restart your virtual machine. Go ahead and click on Restart Now. When it reboots, you may see it blinking like it is here and think something is wrong. If you read closely, it is actually waiting for user input, so just go ahead and press Enter. Once inside the guest instance, you can just click through the information screens and click on Finish. The first thing you'll want to do is set the resolution to a more usable size. Go ahead and click on the menu button in the lower left, and scroll down and click on Settings. And scroll down a little bit and select Devices. And here we can choose a resolution. Pick something more suitable. And if your window's really small like mine, you may have to grab the title bar up here and move it over. Click on Apply. That one looks reasonable to you. You can go ahead and click on Keep Changes. You can exit out of the Displays menu. Also, by this point, you may get a notice about pending updates. You can go ahead and accept them now if you want. I'm just going to go ahead and install them now. It minimizes to a small icon on the left. If you want to see the updates, you can go ahead and click on it and click on Details. Depending on your connection speed, it will take a couple of minutes for the updates to download and install. Once the updates have completed, you'll need to reboot the VM once again. Just go ahead and click on Restart Now. Once it restarts, log back in if you need to. Now we will want to install Guest Editions next. VirtualBox Guest Editions is software we can install on the guest OS, Ubuntu in this case, to make working in the virtual environment easier. It allows us to utilize shared folders, drag and drop, and share clipboard functionality, along with some other improvements. Before we can install the guest editions, we need to ensure our build has the GCC compiler installed. Click on the Start menu, again it's in the lower left, and you can expand all or just type in the search box. We're going to want to open up Terminal, so just type TERM and click on the terminal icon. Expand this a bit. The terminal window, we need to run two commands, letting the first complete before running the second. I will also leave these in the video description. The first command we're going to want to type is sudo apt update. If you're new to Linux, the first command, sudo, stands for superuser do. It allows us as a regular user to perform administrative commands from our user account. Linux is more secure by default than Windows, so you need to use a privileged account to perform any actions that will make changes to the system. The first command is going to update the apt utility. apt is Ubuntu's advanced packaging tool, which we can use to update and install software packages. By running update, we're updating the apt package index, which is the list of packages available within the repository. So go ahead and type in the command as shown and hit enter. Notice you'll need to enter your user account password. Go ahead and type your password, then hit enter. This update should only take a few seconds. Once it is done, we need to type the following command. Sudo apt install build essential dkms Linux headers generic. Go ahead and click on enter. Notice you do not need to re-enter your password this time, as the terminal will remember it for the session. After a moment or two, you'll be prompted if you want to continue. Click on Y, then press enter. This process will take a few minutes to complete. Once the prompt returns, we want to test to make sure the compiler is installed. Type gcc --version. If you get an output like this showing the version of the GCC compiler, everything is good to go. Now we can go ahead and insert the Guest Edition CD. To do that, go up to Devices here, and just at the bottom click Insert Guest Edition CD Image. Normally, you'll be prompted that some software wants to auto-run. You can go ahead and allow this to run. You'll also be prompted for your password. Go ahead and enter your password. Click on Authenticate. Once the software is completed installing, you'll be prompted to reboot the machine. You can press Enter to close the window. Notice also, like in my case, your window shrunk down again. That's okay because we can restore it once we reboot. So go ahead at the top, click on the little drop down by the power icon, find the second power icon, click on that, then choose Restart. Once the VM comes back online, log in again if you need to. Notice that we're now back to our original resolution. Now we can go ahead and set up shared folders. In the VM window containing your guest, click on Devices, and click on Shared Folders, Shared Folder Settings. It is empty now as we have not set anything up yet. Click on the folder with the green plus side off to the right. In the folder path, click the drop-down arrow, and then select Other. Now notice we are browsing our host file system and not the guest. Choose a location for your shared folder. I'm going to make a new directory in my E drive. I'm just going to call mine Ubuntu VM Shared. Go ahead and highlight it, then click Select Folder. Back in the Add Share dialog, we also want to check Auto Mount and also make it permanent. You can leave the mount point blank and the guest will automatically pick something, usually Z. Go ahead and click on OK, and click on OK again. Now if you go over and open files in the file cabinet looking icon, you can see our new share. You can also notice it had a new share in the desktop. If you double click on it, you will get a permissions warning. We need to add our user account to the vboxsf group that VirtualBox created when we installed Ubuntu. To do this, you can use the Start menu again, or you can also hit the Ctrl-Alt-T shortcut for the terminal. Type in sudo again, sudo, adduser, then your username, in my case is dev, but put whatever username you choose. Then we add the group that we want to add our user to. In this case it's called vboxsf. Type it in as shown, again substituting your username where I have dev. Click on enter. It's going to prompt you for your password. Go ahead and enter your password, and again press enter. As you can see here, we've now added our account to the group vboxsf. To verify the groups we're in, you can type in ID, then your username. In my case is dev. So hit ID or username, then hit enter. And here you can see all the groups that your user account is part of. Notice at the end, we're indeed part of the vboxsf group. Go ahead and exit out of the terminal. Now if we go back and double click the share, you notice we get a prompt. You can just type in your username. And we can access the shared folder. And create a new folder. Now if we drop down to our host system and we browse to where we set up the shared folders, you can see our new test folder in there. And here we can just right click somewhere, click on new text document. Again, can make a new test document. Close out of that, open up our folder on our share. There we can see our test text document. And we double click on that, we can open it. Again, we need to type in our password. And here we can try typing in some text. Let's go ahead and try to save it. Notice here we get an error though. That's due to a bug with gedit, Ubuntu's default text editor. And when we try to write some text and save it, we get this error. It has something to do with the VM share being held open by some other process. And so far, there doesn't seem to be a fix. There's a clunky workaround, however, and you can enable it by clicking on Preferences in the text editor. Then under Editor, click on Create a backup copy of files before saving. And you can go ahead and close out of there. Now go back to the text document. Click on Save again. You'll still get the same warning, but this time just go ahead and dismiss it. And click on Save yet again. And it will save it. So like I said, it's a bit clunky, but it does work and allow you to save. Now if we go back to our host file, you can open up the folder. And we can see the changes that we made. It's a bit of a hack, but it works. Thankfully, this only applies to text files, and I've found no issue so far with other file types. We can also enable drag and drop to allow dragging and dropping of files from the host to the guest OS. So open Devices, click on Drag and Drop. Notice that we have three options: host to guest, guest to host, and bidirectional. They work as their name suggests. For instance, host to guest, you can drag and drop a file from the host computer to the guest OS, but not the other way around. The same with guest to host. And finally, bidirectional. I'm going to choose bidirectional here. That way we can drag and drop files back and forth. Again, if I open up our folder from before, and this is on our host system, you just drag a folder and now you can just drop it. Also under Devices, we have Shared Clipboard, again with the same three choices. So again, we choose bidirectional. We can share a clipboard between the host and the VM. Now that we have our installation set up with the basics, at least for the VM functionality, we can take a snapshot of our initial image. To do that, we simply go up to the VM window and select Machine and click on Take Snapshot. Here you can give it a name and description if you wish. I'm just going to call it Initial Snapshot and then click on OK. The VM will automatically write the current state of the machine to disk, and we can restore to this point in the future if we wish. Let's test this quickly before wrapping up with the video. First, right-click on the desktop and choose Change Background. Click on Background, then just select an image. Click on Select. You can exit out of this. Now go ahead and power down the machine. In this case, power off. And then within the VM VirtualBox Manager program, select our host, and in the hamburger menu here, left-click it and click on Snapshots. This will display all the snapshots. Here's our initial image snapshot, and here's the current state of the machine. Since we added the background image, we do have a new current state versus the initial image. In order to restore, just simply click on the initial image, and up here, click on Restore. You're going to get a little warning about what happens when you try to restore. It also offers you to create a snapshot of the current machine state. But since our only change is the background, I'm going to uncheck that for now. So go ahead and click on Restore. And now we can power up our machine at the restored state. Before I do that, however, I want to quickly go back to our host and open up where we stored our VM image, Ubuntu VM image. Open that up. You notice we got a Ubuntu folder where image is stored. Here you can see we have the actual VDI disk image. This is the hard drive as far as our guest OS is concerned. Notice also that's only roughly 8.9 gigabyte in size. This is what I was saying before, where I dynamically allocated drive. Right now I'm only taking up about 9 gigabyte of my actual hard drive on my host. If I set it to fixed, I'd be taking the whole 120 gigabyte, even if this size never gets that big. Also within this folder, notice we have our snapshots that we just took and restored from. Right now we only have 2, but they take a limited amount of space. But I wanted to bring this up because in this parent folder here, if you have important stuff on your VMs, you may want to back up this parent folder. That way you're going to back up your image and your snapshots. Okay, we can close that. We can go back here and we can restart our VM. Here you see we're restoring the virtual machine from backup. And here we're back in with our VM, and notice we're back before we made the background change. I actually kind of like that background, so I think I'll set it back. Okay, I think that just about covers most of the basics, at least related to getting Ubuntu up and running under VirtualBox. Just going to go ahead and power off the machine. And one more tip before I end the video, back here in the VirtualBox VM Manager. Instead of having to open this up all the time, if you actually right-click on your image, you can actually create a shortcut and send it to your desktop. It appears over here. So once you have everything set up, and you won't really need the VirtualBox Manager too much unless you're going to make changes. Instead of having to open that up every time, we can just go ahead and double-click on our icon. And that will directly launch our virtual machine. Okay, so with that, I think I will end this video. And thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.